Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Red Pill Garage. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how mechanics replace your brake pads and machine your discs. These are the tools I'll be using today: brake cleaner, WD-40, a hub buffing tool, an air ratchet, a brake piston compression tool, brake hose clamp, a couple of screwdrivers, 14mm and 17mm spanners, a torque wrench, safety glasses, rattle gun, brake pads, a couple of hooks, performance synthetic greases, Loctite. You could also use a medium strength Loctite also, but these are the synthetic greases I like to use. Okay, the first step in this process, we're going to remove the brake fluid reservoir cap. Okay, next I'll be removing the wheel. If you're going to do a job like this at home, don't forget to use jack stands. Safety comes first. Next, with a 14mm ring spanner, I'm going to remove the caliper guide pins. This step is really important not to forget which guide pin belongs to the bottom and which guide pin belongs to the top. Most cars these days have a rubber sleeve on the guide pin, and this one here does not have that. If you were to mix up the guide pins, it would cause the brake pads to wear unevenly from the top to bottom. In other words, the upper part of the brake pad would have more brake material thickness compared to the bottom, where it can have almost no brake material left, or vice versa. People think, no worries, I can easily change brake pads, and time after time I see this problem many times over the years where people still get it wrong by putting the guide pins in the wrong location. And there's our rubber sleeve. That sleeve also reduces caliper noise. Okay, now it's time to remove the caliper, and you can support that with a piece of wire or even a bungee cord. You don't want the caliper falling and causing any damage to the brake hose or the ABS wire. Next, remove the pad separation clip. That just helps to reduce the friction between the brake pad and the disc rotor. And next, remove the brake pads. You can see the brake pad there is wearing evenly from top to bottom. Like I said earlier, if you put the caliper guide pin in the wrong position, one side of the pad will be thicker than the other due to uneven wear. And there's our wear indicator clip. Once the brake pads wear down a certain amount, that clip will rub onto the disc surface, creating a high-pitched squealing noise, and that will let you know your brakes need replacing. Okay, next I'm going to compress the piston back into the caliper. Now if you don't have a tool like this, you can use a flat blade screwdriver and just lever against the inside of the caliper and the piston, and it slowly will work its way in. Now by pushing the piston back in, that fluid is going to go back into the reservoir bottle. And if you remember in the beginning of this video, I unscrewed the cap off the bottle. When compressing the piston, just make sure you're doing it nice and slowly. You don't want to go too fast, as this can cause the brake fluid to squirt out of the reservoir bottle, and it can land on the fenders and paintwork of the car, which will cause a lot of damage. Okay, once you've done that, now it's time to hang the caliper out of the way again. Next, I'm going to clamp off the brake hose. Now you don't need to go out and buy this tool, but it does make life a bit easier. If you don't have a tool like this, just make sure you push one piston back at a time, but make sure the opposite caliper is still mounted on the caliper cradle, otherwise the piston will fall out. Okay, over to the other side, and to remove the wheel, with our 14mm spanner, we're going to remove the caliper guide pins. Once you've cracked them loose, you can use a 14mm ratchet spanner just to speed things up. And take note, the rubber sleeve is on the top guide pin, not the bottom. Like I said before, you don't want to get them mixed up. And the bottom one, and you can see there's no rubber sleeve on that one. Next, remove the caliper, and then you got our pad separation clip. Remove that, and also take note of that. That also can be on the bottom as well, but in this case here it's on the top. Next, remove the brake pads. You can see they're wearing nice and evenly there. And there's our wear indicator clip. Next, we're going to compress that piston. Remember what I said earlier about doing one side at a time if you didn't clamp off the brake hose? Imagine the brake hose had no clamp on it. By compressing the brake caliper piston back on this side will cause the caliper piston on the opposite side to fall out. This will be a total disaster if this were to occur, because there's a good chance you'll need to bleed the brake system with a scan tool due to modern cars being fitted with the ABS systems. That means towing your car to a mechanic, so this is really important to remember. And now you can safely hang the caliper out of the way, ready for the next step. Here comes the fun part. We're going to spray some WD-40 on the disc hub surface, and we're going to give that surface a nice clean up. And also clean up those wheel studs as well. The reason why I do this is to prepare a clean surface for the on-car disc machine adapter to sit true and flush onto the disc hub surface to give a better quality cut. Once I've done that, I just hit it with some brake cleaner to get rid of all that crud that's there. Next, I'll do the other side. Have you guys ever experienced when you're driving and you press your brake pedal and you find that you get a bad vibration through the brake pedal or the steering wheel or even through the floor of the vehicle? Now you know why any decent mechanic will machine your discs when they do a brake job. This is called disc thickness variation, or DTV. This means your discs are warped, or to put it in other words, you can have thick and thin sections on the disc surface. So the clamping force of the brake pads trying to grab onto the disc, causing the brake pads to move inwards and outwards quickly, causing these vibration-like symptoms like brake pedal pulsation and steering wheel oscillations. Now you're probably wondering, why does my car do this? Keep watching and I'll explain to you later on in the video. And now it's time to remove the brake hose clamp as both caliper pistons are compressed. And this is my on-car disc brake lathe, and this is what I use to machine discs when I'm doing a brake job. These are the cutting tips that cut the actual metal surface itself. And those knobs there in the back, that's how I gauge how much metal I need to skim off the surface of the disc. Usually 1 to 2 cuts is sufficient. This has been a great little machine. It has served me well for the last 25 years. I'm hoping to upgrade it in the next couple of months. Here's the adapter plate for the brake lathe. Now you know why I cleaned the disc hub surface. So this adapter plate sits true and flush onto the disc surface. If you're wondering what those numbers are on the adapter plate, it's to basically suit other vehicles with the same 4-stud pattern. Now it's time to nip up the wheel nuts. They don't need to be super tight, just nipped up. I sped up the video in this section as not to bore you guys with all the measuring I had to do. Disc runout needs to be measured with a dial indicator. Disc thickness variation can be measured using a micrometer. We must measure the thickness of the disc about 25 millimeters in front of the outer edge. Measurements should be taken at least 8 to 10 points around the circumference, and there should be no greater difference of 0.03 millimeters between any of these measurements, as specified by the manufacturer. Once the disc is cut, I'll give it a light sand on both sides and hit it with a little bit of compressed air to blow off any metal filings, and then finally with the brake cleaner. And that's our end result. Nice flat true surface. On the left side of the car, I thought I'd show you guys one part of the measuring that I do. At the back there is the dial indicator gauge, and those fluctuations you see on that needle, that little needle there, that tells me how much DTV that disc has, disc thickness variation. So we've got to try and reduce that movement so we can cut that disc. And you can see there's hardly any movement there whatsoever. That tiny little bit of fluctuation you see there is just vibration from the transmission. I've sped up the video again as not to bore you guys. You're probably wondering why I sand the disc, especially after it's been machined. But disc machining creates a residue called graphite. Now this residue has to be removed by the sanding and also using brake cleaner, otherwise, believe it or not, it will cause bad braking performance. The graphite will act as a lubricant. Again, I'll give it a quick sand and hit it with some brake cleaner. I thought I'd show you guys the amount of metal that was removed from the disc machining. The car is slightly lighter now, which should give it an extra 1 to 2 horsepower. You can use this product here to lubricate your caliper guide pins to stop them from seizing up, or this product here. That's another good quality product that I use. It's a high performance synthetic lubricant. Next, I like to make sure the caliper cradle bracket bolts are tight, which are located in the back, one there and one there. And the same thing on the other side of the car, one there and one there. Okay, now it's time to lubricate our caliper cradle bracket with our synthetic lubricant. Now in this situation here with this particular car, we don't actually grease the caliper guide pins. We're going to grease inside that cradle bracket. Reason being, if we grease the guide pins, as we go to push those guide pins in, those rubber boots that you see there will actually wipe the grease off. You can see that caliper guide pin popping out every time I push it in. That's because there's an air pocket in that caliper cradle bracket. Don't forget to put a little bit of Loctite on the caliper guide pin threads. I actually forgot to hit the record button on the camera. And then one final clean with the brake cleaner again. And over to the other side, we're going to grease up the caliper cradle bracket with a synthetic lube. Make sure it's well lubricated so the caliper floats nicely. Next, I'm going to install the brake pads. And the pad separation clip. Some cars have an upper and a lower, but in this particular model there's just the one. Now the caliper. And now some Loctite. You can also use medium strength. You only need a couple of drops on each guide pin. And now I'm going to tighten up the guide pins. Once tightened, I'm going to make sure the caliper has side-to-side movement, and that's what you want. And a final clean with some brake cleaner. That side-to-side movement you just seen, that's what we call a floating caliper. It floats side to side. Then I use WD-40 to lubricate the wheel studs. Some mechanics will argue that you're supposed to use grease, but grease traps dirt and grit which over time will damage the threads on the wheel stud and nut. Earlier in the video, I said keep watching as to what causes this DTV or brake pulsation type symptoms. The two main causes of the brake symptoms is when mechanics over tighten the wheel nuts with an impact gun and not using a torque wrench. And the other main cause is not lubricating the caliper guide pins or even using the wrong type of grease to lube the guide pins. Symptoms can develop even after 10 to 15,000 kilometers after your brakes have been replaced. Just make sure when using WD-40 in the studs, spray in a downward motion and it only half press the trigger so you don't get any spray on the braking contact surface area. When using the impact gun, I have it set on the lowest setting as not to cause any problems as I mentioned before. And now it's time to torque up the wheel nuts. On this particular model car, it's 108 Newton meters. When torquing up the wheel nuts, go in a crisscross action, do not go in a circular direction. As you can see, I have plenty of room to move with a torque wrench. If I had over tightened those wheel nuts, that torque wrench would not move, and this is why I use the lowest setting on my impact gun. This is probably the most important part of the job. We need to pump the brake pedal several times to get the caliper pistons to make contact with the brake pads, so the pads can push up against the disc rotor. Don't pump the pedal more than half its full travel. After several pumps, you can feel the pedal getting harder to press. And finally, I'm going to fit the cap back onto the reservoir bottle. And that's the correct way a mechanic replaces your brake pads and machines your discs. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.